Thank you very much for your patience. Finally, our esteemed speaker from Kazakhstan has come and everything has been settled with the presentation. I would like to introduce my colleague, moderator, Mr. Yakupov, who is president of the Association of Regional Investment Agencies of Russia, president of the Development Fund of Islamic Business and Finance from Tatarstan, Kazan, and he will make some introductory remarks. Dear colleagues, good morning. It's very pleasant to be in St. Petersburg. Unexpectedly, it appeared that this is the celebration of the Day of the City today, and the city is brilliant. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. Our event and our session had to start at 10 o'clock, but as good wine, we wanted just to keep a pause, and in half an hour the conference room is full. Thank you very much for attending this conference, for your response. I think that even if there are about 50 lawyers and advocates here and legislators, we might think that soon in the Russian Federation the necessary law would appear that will make it possible for the Islamic banking structures to start a full-fledged operation. Before passing on to the Russian Federation and to the practice and experience accumulated in the last few years, I would like to focus on the fact that in the CIS states, particularly in the countries of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Azerbaijan, these are the countries that are members of organizations of Muslim cooperation. They're also members of the Islamic Bank of Development, and in these countries there is an active work related to implementation by business and financial structures of different Islamic banking financial products, and from the viewpoint of ensuring the legislative basis. Kazakhstan is the first republic and the first country which adopted the law on Islamic banking. In 2009, these initiatives that were discussed from 2006-2007. In 2009, they became real law. Of course, in the last 5 or 6 years, they have been developing with great difficulties, and that poses a good example for us what should be done and what should not be done. Here with us is Aysulo Sapiyevna Baybagasova, who is head of the representative agency of the National Bank of the Republic of Kazakhstan and Russia. Last week in Almaty, there was a summit where IFSB, Financial Services Board. This is the main council of regulators of the Islamic financial market, where all the central banks practicing Islamic financing are members. And for 2 days, we actively discussed the themes related to the 10-year plan of development of Islamic financing and regulatory part. After a certain stage of that 10-year plan, and Kazakhstan, as I have mentioned, really takes a very active position in development of Islamic financing and banking across the post-Soviet space, and it was a great pleasure that I give the floor to our colleague. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful forum. I would like to share our experience lately. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, this is the third event where we discuss the themes of Islamic financing. Now that is a very topical issue for Russia. Take into account the opinions and the standpoints that were presented. 2 weeks ago, there was a roundtable discussion at the State Duma on that theme. Last week, there was a conference of Islamic financing, and this is the third event to discuss that theme. As you know, As to the experience of Kazakhstan concerning implementation of Islamic financing, active work started after 2008, after the crisis, and in 2009, for the first time in the territory of the SAS state, Central Asia, law was adopted on Islamic financing. Then in July 2011, we adopted a law that permitted to issue the state Islamic securities, and that extended the list of issuers of corporate securities, Islamic corporate securities. In 2012, the National Bank developed a draft law on the questions of Islamic insurance and leasing, and in April 2015 it was enacted. So for 3 years we were working on adoption of this law. And in March 2012, we also approved the roadmap on development of Islamic financing until 2020. The work on making amendments to the law was quite significant because that concerned very many basic laws. That was the civil code, the tax code. As for the financial sphere, that was the law on banks and banking activity, on the market of securities, on investment funds, on collaterals for the deposits placed at the banks, on the second level, on licensing. That also concerned the state registration of the title to property and transactions therewith. At present, our laws provide for organization of the activity of Islamic banks and the activity of the Islamic investment funds and issue of Islamic financial instruments. As you know, a significant role in the process is played by the National Bank. Of course, this work was conducted together by the ministers and departments. The Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Industry and Trade was involved, the Ministry of Finance to a certain degree, and the main role was that of the National Bank, which concerned the development of the draft laws on Islamic financing. There was also monitoring and analysis of the international approaches and standards to regulations and supervision over the activity related to Islamic financing. At the level of the government, they developed a roadmap on implementation, and the National Bank also implemented that roadmap. We have also developed our strategic plan of the National Bank for 2015-2011. This included cooperation with the international financial organizations, foreign Islamic financial institutions and regulators, generally the promotion of financial instruments and attraction and implementation of the grant on Islamic financing. There was also work done with involvement with participants of the market of Islamic financing. Different workshops and conferences were held on Islamic financing. And in addition, if we dwell on the roadmap of development of Islamic financing until 2020, unfortunately we have some technical problems and we cannot open our file with presentation, so I will just tell you about it briefly. A roadmap was developed for development of Islamic financing based on improvement of law on Islamic financing, explanation work and development of Islamic financial infrastructure, then the development of international cooperation, the development of the state sector, issue of the state Islamic securities, and the program on the study and exchange of experience. Besides, it was also planned to develop the market of Islamic financial services. Scientific and educational work was conducted, and we set up the Education Analytical Center on investigation of Islamic financing, and there was a discipline, fundamentals of Islamic financing in our curriculum, and of course we worked with investors. Today, the law which we recently adopted on making amendments to matters of insurance of Islamic financing. The main conceptual trends of this law are creation of the legislative base for Islamic insurance and improvement of the law on matters related to activities of the Islamic banks, trade murabaha, and the legislative basis for Islamic leasing, creation of the public system of guarantee guaranteeing insurance payments, and the improvement of legislation on the matters of mandatory insurance of the workers against accidents. And if we detailize, for instance, on a couple of items concerning the Islamic insurance, in accordance with this law, we adopted the basic principles of Islamic insurance requirements to the activity of the insuring organizations. As to the trade murabaha, the law on banks and banking activity was amended in respect of trade murabaha and banking operation of the Islamic banks. As to the tax code of Kazakhstan, we made certain amendments related to the use of separate tax registration in case of transactions related to trade murabaha. As to Islamic leasing, we provided the basis for the main requirements of Islamic leasing and requirements to the activity of Islamic leasing organizations. And in the course of the events, when we discussed the matters related to the possibility of making amendment to the law of Russia, whether it can be adopted or can we apply state-by-state approval instruction of regulatory acts which could advance the solution of the problem. When we attended the roundtable meeting, based on the results of that meeting, we agreed that a resolution will be adopted to set up a working group, and that question will be studied based on the European Economic Union and based on the experience of Kazakhstan. We have a special department under EU Financial Department that would solve these problems, and I think there will be some joint working groups and will develop and draw up some recommendations and resolutions. What else was discussed by us? So we actively discussed the matter of exchanging experience in this field, so we're ready to share our experience. We often conduct different conferences for a roundtable. Last week, for instance, we had a conference in Almaty, and this year we're planning some events during which we'll share our experience with great pleasure. We had in March 2010, we opened Islamic Bank, Al Hilal, and currently we're working. We have Zaman Bank, with which we work on its transformation to the Islamic Bank. And after the adoption of the new law, a lot of amendments will be made. We're actively working. We have attracted a lot of investments, including the grant under Islamic financing. And in compliance with this grant, currently we invite the consultants that will be working so as to create a Kazakhstan model of development of Islamic financing, take into account the adaptation of our current law to the principles of Islamic financing. And of course, we'll be actively using the experience of Malaysia, Bahrain, and the UK. And based on the results of this work with the consultants, later we're going to make some point amendments related to taxations, accounting, different financial types of reporting. And lately we are have been actively working and with the Financial Center on Development of Islamic Financing, and so that will be set up in Almaty. Lately, we decided to make Astana the financial center, include the Center on Development of Islamic Financing. So that was brief information on the work which we have done, and during the period when we're faced with a crisis and there is a deficit in investment that offers a good possibility to attract Islamic financing, we just have to make certain amendments to the law.
Oh, thank you very much. And using the experience of Kazakhstan, I would like to comment. The colleague says that the interest to Islamic finances manifested itself at the time of crisis in the year 2008, and that Kazakhstan was the country where the president and the leaders of the country made the decision. And so several teams were formed, consultants were invited, and the work was carried out in order to create the legislative platform that would make it possible to work in the sphere of Islamic banking. But the law, it happened so that the law was drawn mostly for the foreign banks coming and opening in Kazakhstan their subsidiaries operating within the framework of this law. And this did not happen just by itself. The interaction with the Islamic financial structures in Southeast Asia and in Middle East, when we compare them and when we talk to them about their entry with their money to the territory of the SIS, immediately they ask us about the necessary legislation. So the legislation of Kazakhstan was a response to that. We can say now, yes, there is this legislation, but after a while, when the banks began to grow and to move towards the Islamic banks, it became obvious that the law does not allow the national banks to convert from conventional to Islamic. The legislation did not stipulate that. So if a bank within the framework of the legislation decides, a bank in Kazakhstan decides to work in the field of Islamic banking, then they will first have to close down and then reopen as a new bank, which is not acceptable. And allow me to finish. And Zaman Bank for 2 years has not been able to get the license exactly for that reason. But we can see that the changes occur quite quickly, and the counterparts and the colleagues are doing everything to get the licenses. That's proceeding from what the players in the market say. Well, of course, the National Bank might object and express its opinion. But this is experience for us. In the Russian Federation today, when we talk about Islamic banking and finances, we also first of all understand that these are instruments in order to attract foreign capital, and creating conditions for them, we can expect their coming here. But at the same time, we indicate quite clearly that we should never forget the potential of clients of the Islamic banks that do exist in the country, and about the commercial banks that today are willing to open the Islamic banking windows and even work entirely in the field of Islamic banking. You are familiar with those. The experience of Kazakhstan indicates that we should consider that particular option when the banks with foreign capital begin to work in our market. At the same time, it's necessary to provide an opportunity for our financial structures to engage in this activity. And the immediate experience of work in this field, and quite a lot of experience indeed, apart from Kazakhstan, belongs to Kyrgyzstan. Because Kyrgyzstan, in the year 2009, by the decree of the president, entrusted one of the banks to work in trend of Islamic banking, EcoBank, and they first established a subsidiary, Eco Islamic Bank, and then step by step they moved entirely towards Islamic banking. And about a year ago, they stopped dealing in the framework of conventional banking, and it's just Eco Islamic Bank that operates now. And last year, we met the shareholders of the bank, and they who say that they're at the break-even point, and they were among the first 3 banks in Kyrgyzstan, and now they are among the first 10 at present. So about 60,000 banking transactions in Kyrgyzstan have been accumulated in this particular sphere. And so this is an experience that is important for Russia as well. Why do we focus so much attention today not on the Middle East and not on the East Pacific Asia? Because they follow the British law, but practically all these CIS countries are following the Romano-Germanic system. And Ines, of course, will speak about this in more detail, but at the moment I can just give the floor to her. Now, Terberger Ines, specialist on the issues of banking law from the St. Petersburg State University. We met at the summit with her last week, and it was a discovery for me that there is a dissertation being written at the St. Petersburg University exactly on that, about the British law, the English law, and the Germanic law, and the Islamic law, and Ines will probably talk about exactly about this this morning. Good morning, dear colleagues, and everybody present here today. Well, now, a few words to begin with, contrary to what Mr. Yakubov says. The issues of Romanic and Germanic legal system and regulations and the comparison of those with the Islamic law is not exactly within the framework of our discussion, but the Eurasian Economic Union and the prospects of Islamic banking within the framework of this union, that's what is important for us today. As it is well known, from the time of the enforcement on the 1st of January of 2015 of the agreement on the Eurasian Economic Union, the purpose of which is, first of all, the strengthening and the rapprochement of the economies of the respective countries. The expert community faced the issue not just of the effective development of the financial space, but also modernization and competitiveness and improvement of competitiveness and diversification of the risks of the banking sectors in the national states. And here we discuss the following. The supervisory bodies understand that it is necessary to formulate an absolutely new approach, a new design of the financial market of the economic union through the for better understanding of the alternative sources of funding and through mastering of the present day instruments that are so typical of the Islamic banks. In the agreement, there is a special division dedicated to the regulation of the financial markets, which emphasizes the necessity to adopt the harmonized requirements aimed at the supervision and regulation of the financial markets. That means that within the framework of the Union, there must be created equal conditions for the functioning of the Islamic banking. So the situation when in some of the nations Islamic funding is being developed, and for that purpose favorable conditions are created, and in the others nothing is changing in this particular field of regulatory work, is not permissible. And as it has been said by our colleagues from Kazakhstan and by Mr. Yakupov, in Kazakhstan there are two basic laws. One on the organization and activities of the Islamic banks and organization of Islamic financing, and the other one on the insurance of Islamic financing, which was enacted in May this year. And in autumn, in his public interview, the central channel, Vesti 24, the chairman of the National Bank of Kazakhstan, Mr. Karanbetov, publicly spoke about the necessity to introduce Islamic banking within the framework of the Eurasian space. I would like to mention that if we take promotion of the Islamic banking in Russia, then the experience of Kyrgyzstan can be of great use. 10 years ago, Kyrgyzstan turned into a pioneer at the space of CIS from the point of view of the introduction of the Islamic banking methods. In such states as Bahrain, Indonesia, Iran, Qatar, Kuwait, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, we can see the main asset of the Islamic market of capital. The members of the Islamic Bank of Development, and particular countries of the Council of Cooperation of the Gulf Arabic states, carry out a very consistent policy aimed at the integration of the Islamic system in the global economy. The experience of these countries shows that the first step towards the development of the banking system is not just the adoption of the individual standards and norms, but the training and the education of the professionals, the creation of the Sharia councils, and the training of the education of the population on the issue of Islamic financing. And one of the main specific features of the banking Sharia councils is the responsibility of these members to assess the legal and the moral value of the transactions in view of Sharia. Now, so at the initial stage of discussion of the introduction of the uniform legislation that regulates the Islamic banking system in the Eurasian community, it is necessary to carry out discussions of specialists. It is necessary to monitor the analysis of the existing approaches and standards of Islamic banking in different jurisdictions, necessary to work out the uniform attitude of the supervisory bodies of the respective nations in relation to Islamic banking. With all of that, the most important aspect is the choice of the single model for Islamic banking in the community, because in the world at present there are two approaches. The traditional approach orientated at the strict observation of Sharia, and the reformers approach orientated at the use of the external forms of Islamic law. The supporters of the first, they actually create a simplified version, which is cheaper and it's easier to introduce politically and organizationally. But in the last case, the experts are also indicating that there is also a risk of the lack of trust and confidence from the population and also from the potential investors, particularly from the countries that represent the Council of Cooperation of the Arabic states in the Gulf area, who first of all do not think about the external shape, but rather about the internal content of the banking system in general. So it follows from here that mistakes must be avoided in the process of the introduction of the Islamic banking in the Union. So it is necessary to avoid the discussion of individual civil norms and forms of investment activity without consideration of the norms of Sharia. So the absence of the understanding of how the Islamic law functions in general. Without that, it is impossible to understand whether it is possible to carry out these or those transactions from the point of view of the legislation of the respective countries. Finally, I would like to say that an important event in this framework of the promotion of the successful functioning of Islamic banking in Russia is the organization of two roundtable discussions at the Committee of the State Duma of the Russian Federation for Financial Markets. The first roundtable was organized in March this year on the problems and prospects of the introduction of Islamic banking in Russia. And the second one was held last week under the title The Alternative Banking in Russia. According to the resolution of the roundtable discussion on alternative forms of banking for the improvement of the conditions of the functioning of the financial markets, parliamentary hearings are suggested on the topic alternative banking in Russia. It is also suggested by the participants of this roundtable discussion to form a parliamentary club, a permanent club, promoting alternative banking in Russia. And it's also necessary to mention that in the territory of the community, there are about 36 million Muslims, 17% of the amount of people residing in the respective countries. And the overall Muslims of the Arabic states in the Gulf of Finland, Persian Gulf, about 3 million. And although the number of Muslims here is much greater. Actually, the difference there is in the percentage of the population. The Muslims of the countries constituting the Eurasian Union do not have a chance to make use of the advantages of the Islamic banking. So, there is an example, of course, of certain states, and it is understandable that very often the options are not optimal, but this should not prevent the development of legislation and the overall rules for Islamic banking, particularly considering the fact that the banking sector of the Eurasian Union does not provide equal access to the financial market, to the legal entities and to the individuals. Moreover, the adoption of the uniform rules for Islamic banking can definitely lead to the improvement of the investment climate, the influx of investments, and will help to avoid the pressure of the national banks, will make the development of the union much more sustainable. Particularly if we remember what is happening in the Western banks, and this will help them to avoid the control of those. So these are the realities of today and the Eurasian Union and the aspects associated with Islamic banking in these countries. A short remark. It's quite interesting to see that this topic is studied at the St. Petersburg University by a lawyer from Latvia. So that means our neighbors are interested in this particular theme. Questions, please. Use the microphone, please, for interpretation needs. I have a question, Tresolu. You spoke about the second-tier banks and the deposits that they should have. So what do you mean by the second-tier or second-level banks? Or maybe third or fourth level or tier of deposits, respectively?
Thank you for your question. As to the second-tier bank, the banking system is divided into two tiers. First, the central bank, and the second-tier commercial banks. We also have the Development Bank of Kazakhstan, but it has it was set up according to the law, and that is a special category. He's not assigned to the banks of the first or second tier. As to the figures specifically, concerning the deposits, total amount of financing of the Islamic Bank of Development of Kazakhstan today is about $1.3 billion. And even by 2009, our large banks attracted from $50 to $150 million. working on financing as agents when financing Kazakhstan companies by Murabaha product purchase and sale contract was concluded. Currently, we're forming a list of applications from Kazakhstan banks for open credit lines for the trade in Murabaha up to $4 million. And probably I will dwell on the presentation of my colleague briefly. If we consider it from the viewpoint of just for Muslims or for some private sector, we are not considering this question in this connection. That is a good possibility to finance priority sectors such as agriculture, mining industry, petroleum industry, trade services, distributor services, consumer goods, construction, transport, communications. These are the trends. As you know, this money is not allocated for gambling because there are certain requirements. On the other hand, that is a good possibility to attract investments for such trends which suffer primarily, such as agriculture. It is rather difficult to get a loan for agriculture because there are certain risks involved. Therefore, from this viewpoint, that offers a good possibility, and in principle, that is quite popular. And with the adoption of the latest amendments to the law, that offers a good opportunity to set up leasing companies, investment funds, microcrediting organizations. That was not done as quickly because a lot of amendments were made to the law, and as you probably know, taking into account the fact that there are a lot of lawyers in the conference room, it is rather difficult to make any amendments to the law when it has to pass through the parliament, and we have to get to agree with it on it with the deputies, and so a significant time passes before it is signed. Even if we compare it, for instance, taking into account the fact that they started this work recently, just for comparison, I'm going to can give some examples. On the official list of our Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, there is a special sector, Islamic securities. We provided the legal basis to issue state securities by the Ministry of Finance. Up to now, there was no issue of sukuk, but now we analyze the experience of different countries to start issuing of sukuk later. As for some specific figures for comparison, since we have started investigating this trend recently, if we take, different countries, we are revising these figures and indicators. Until recently, we thought that by 2020, 3 or 5% of the banking system has to be assigned to Islamic financing. Until 2025, we had to increase it to 10%. If we compare it with such countries as Turkey and Malaysia, take into account the fact that in Turkey in 1984, the first Islamic bank was founded. By 2004, that was 6% of the banking sector. By 2014, 5.1% in Malaysia. The first bank was founded in 1983, in 2000, 6.9%, and by 2010 they reached 22% of the banking sector working with Islamic financing. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Since we are discussing the East, and the East is a very fine and intricate thing, I will address ladies, distinguished Ines Hanum, distinguished Serkan Fanom. It is quite pleasant today that at St. Petersburg University they are studying Islamic law and Muslim law, and they write a thesis. That's very pleasant. My question is, as you're a practitioner, the question concerning the Islamic financial system, the order of the financial systems in the Islamic states. As far as I know, The Islamic financial system operates according to a special order based on Sharia morals that is based on the borrowed issuing of loans. There is such a notion as the issuance of money on the basis of the certain interest rate, and that is regarded as haram in Islam. What is the procedure of the project? Do you have a certain project, or just you issue the loans? What is the procedure of borrowing the funds? Thank you. I will try to be brave enough to distribute to illustrate two basic aspects. Islamic financing might proceed along two trains. First, that and the total general unitary cooperation. It is not related just to prohibition of the interest rate. That is a total prohibition on the growth without risk or without labor. The civil legal forms which are practiced by the Islamic banks in the countries are discussed based on the standards of the international organizations. This is the form of rent on an analogy, by analogy with the leasing, with the right of purchase or without it. That is purchase or sales with prepayment and with extra charge and with the deferral of payment. Everything remains in the field and not in the field of lending, and not in the field of loan, but it is within the field of civil legal transactions with debt obligations. The second form is just unit cooperation that might be based on the property offered by the customer and without such property offered. And in this case, the profit and loss are divided on the basis of the agreement of unity cooperation. In one case, the customer is a participant of the property contribution, divides the profit and losses. In the other case, the client of the bank, if he invests not property but labor and knowledge, he will divide only the profit without sharing the losses. He will share the profit without sharing the losses. As to the prohibitions, the prohibition to growth is not the only prohibition in the Islamic banking financing. A major component for understanding the boundaries of prohibition is the prohibition to make transactions with the element of indefiniteness, this so-called verb. And the second aspect, in addition to the growth, is prohibition to make transactions with an element of mazir and pari. No transactions with derivative instruments in traditional understanding, as in the conventional banking, are possible in the Islamic banking. As far as I understand now, the international community of experts on Islamic financing have found some trends for developing their derivative instruments, and there is also a possibility of non-speculative transactions with currency. But, for instance, the games on Forex on behalf of representatives of the Islamic banks are prohibited. So that was just a brief description of the general approach. Thank you very much. And using the example of a leasing transaction, what will be the difference between the leasing transaction under the Islamic law and that under the classical law described in the international convention? The rent is included. The main difference is the risk transition from the legal viewpoint. Here the title passes. According to the Islamic law, the title to the object of contract will pass only when there is a possibility of getting the title, not from the time of issuing the transaction. In conventional bank, as soon as you receive a car, for instance, or a vehicle, I was previously the head at the judicial department at one of the major conventional banks in Latvia, and 3 large vehicles were stolen from us before the customer has received them in Latvia. And the forwarding company, a major forwarding company, that was a major forwarding company, and unfortunately we obliged our customer to pay to us under the leasing contract. There was insurance and all other matters covered, but that would be not possible in Islamic banking because the customer would have to pay to us under the contract only after the time when he really gets the title. The Islamic bank doesn't issue the direct money for purchasing. He first purchases the object of the rent agreement, not leasing, ijara, and only afterwards he will delegate the title. In the case of sales and purchase, he will sell it and then he delegates it to his customer. And the relations between the first seller and the end customer of the Islamic banks doesn't exist. An Islamic bank is a mediator, and the right holder at some time for a specific object of purchase and sale or rent. This is the main difference between the models of the conventional and Islamic banking. Thank you, Nessa. I hope that our colleagues who are not involved in financial relations in Islamic banking, probably it would be useful for them to get such primary information. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yakupov so that he would detailize on the current situation in the Russian Federation, because there are a lot of colleagues who are lawyers and advocates from Russia, so that we'll get acquainted with the current situation and the prospects of its operation in future.
Логически. So, while the presentation is not on, I would like to say that the interest to Islamic banking, well, the presentation doesn't seem to work. Anyway, so I'll just talk. So, at the beginning of this century, this topic began to brew, so to speak. And I myself began to work on this theme beginning with the year 2001 for 14 years since I came back from Malaysia. So it's 14 years indeed, and there is still no legislation in the Russian Federation about Islamic financing. I hope it appears in the next couple of years. So in the previous decade, it was the time when we tried to understand the basic principles of Islamic banking. At the end of the decade, in the year 2007-8, we began to interact with the Islamic Bank of Development, a multi-institutional bank that brings together 56 countries. And it's important to remember that they are members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Now, Russia is an observer within this structure, and so this provides us with the possibility to interact with all the structures within the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and of course with the Islamic Development Bank. In the year 2008, for the first time, with the participation of this bank, an international investment conference was held, and an enormous number of investors from Middle East took part in it, and there were many from the Russian Federation as well, looked at different projects. And what was very important at that time, many of the investors who work with the Islamic Development Bank won't be able to enter Russia with their funding without the respective legislation. Then next year, the Kazan summit was opened, the summit of Russia and the Islamic cooperation countries, and you're all invited this year. And so we have been working for 6 years. During the first year, we talk about Islamic banking and financing and the application of the rules in Russia. Today, we're talking about Islamic funding for constructive global trade and investments. And our colleague spoke about statistics. We can see that the process is developing, and the growth of the market is 20-30% per year, which is indeed most interesting, not only for the Muslim countries, but for other countries as well. In 2010, at the second summit, for the first time, we presented the roadmap for Russia, how Russia could move towards the development of Islamic financing. There had been attempts, there were roundtable discussions and some workshops dedicated to that, but for the first time we were able to pull everything together and to understand where we could move. While Kazakhstan decided to adopt the legislation first, and then instructions were worked out within it, and the practice began to be acquired. And Hilal Bank is a part of it, the Emirates banks. That was a sort of a guinea pig, and our colleagues were able to work with those. And during the third year of its existence, the bank began to display quite positive results, and it's a profitable bank nowadays, although it works just in the corporate segment. So in 2010, we looked at the legislation, and we told our colleagues what could be done within the framework of the existing legislation. Now, first of all, if we try to answer the question why Islamic funding, then, well, of course, the target market was the internal market. We're talking about over 20 million Muslims that live in the Russian Federation. But according to statistics of the banks from other countries, we can see that Muslims amount to just 50% of the clientele of the Islamic banks. The rest half are people who are not Muslims, but who work with those banks for their own reasons and on the basis of their own principles. And Islamic banking is open to external investments and borrowing for the improvement of the economy and financial sphere in general. And every single time we go through the financial crisis, the interest to Islamic financing increases. High level of trust of financial institutes and integration, financial and economic integration between the countries of Eurasian community. So the model of the the presentation seems to be on, yes. Now, here you can see the Foundation for the Development of Islamic Business, established in 2010 after the first resolution of the Kazan Summit. It is the center of competences of the Islamic business and funding in Russia. We provide legal support, financial support. We have the international partners all over the world, and we promote different international events dedicated to Islamic funding, and we interact with the public authorities in the Russian Federation and abroad. The latest initiatives of the foundation, or the events that we held on a regular basis, is the Kazan Sukuk conference, for the second time held in April this year, and the event was very technical. And there were a lot of corporations present and financial structures who want to work in this field. There are corporations in the Russian Federation that want to work with Sukuk, and there are no serious barriers towards that. But if Sukuk is to be issued by the regions, by the governments of the regions in the Russian Federation, then of course certain amendments of the legislation will be needed. Now, apart from the roadmap that was presented in 2010, in 2013, and our colleague from Thomson Reuters worked with us. We signed with them a long-term agreement, and we began to work on how to draw a proper roadmap for the development of Islamic financing. And so the Moscow office, the Dubai office colleagues made their very important contribution into that, and we, of course, keep working with them. Thomson Reuters today is one of the providers of the latest information on the Islamic financial branch and sector. In April this year, understanding that there had been a lot of initiatives and roundtable discussions, and everyone kept saying that things need to be changed, but nobody could say what exactly and how. With the participation of Malaysian partners, we formed a consortium, Russian-Malaysian, and they signed agreement with Tatarstan with the purpose of tackling the most important issues and preparing Tatarstan as the pilot regional project for the launching of the Islamic financial institutes. Well, of course, all this is being done within the framework of coordination with the federal structures. The ECO system in Tatarstan for the introduction of Islamic funding is quite well prepared. Akbar's Bank twice had transactions with the use of the instruments of Murabah. For the first time, they were able to attract $60 million, next time $100 million. So the real investments, and all this was done by the Russian Tatarstan Bank, and the resources came from Southeast Asia, from Middle East, and for the 7th time, the Kazan summit is to be held this year. We're inviting all of you, and then there will be a conference held in Moscow, and the Islamic Financial Network Forum in October is planned in Moscow. After the results of the feasibility study are known, which we work on at present, the results will be ready in September, and upon agreement with the work group in the Council of Federation, cooperation with the Ministry of Finance of the State Duma and the Central Bank, we hope very much that the results of this work is a good basis for the necessary changes in the legislation. Since the work takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, everyone is invited to take part in that, and there is quite a lot of interesting aspects, and we would definitely like many of our financial people and our lawyers to be involved in this work. Now, as for the existing opportunities for the Islamic banks, I would like to say, first of all, that the model of the Russian Islamic system, financial system, let me say, Kazakhstan followed the route of drawing the legislation first and then acquiring the practical experience. Together with our counterparts from the financial market in 2010, understanding that legislation is not going to be drawn that fast, we decided to work within the framework of the existing legislation to begin to use the instruments that do not contradict the Islamic law and the Russian law, and acquire certain practice and experience, and then on the basis of that begin to change to amend the legislation. So within the framework that was presented then, we said that the foundation is needed the investment company, direct investments fund, the collective investment, a mutual investment, non-banking organization, leasing companies, the credit cooperative, the society of insurance, mutual insurance, zakat, Vakf fund, and managing companies, charity funds, and specialized courts and arbitration courts, and all this is being formed, and all this was presented in 2010. And then after that, the Russian, now, if we look at this slide, you will see that the Russian legislation allows the functioning of the Islamic banks. which, except for crediting operations, can carry out the following operations. That's different accounting operations, currency operations, export-import operations, acquisition of currency, warranties and guarantees. They can work with individuals, manage financial resources. They can work with precious metals, and Welsh banks actually carried out this work with the precious metals, store documents and valuables, and they can work at the market of securities, lease real estate and transport and vehicles, and lease resources for the entrepreneurs. A ban on the direct involvement in production work and insurance work makes it possible to focus on partnerships. And Murabach and funding the banking legislation does not create any limitations for the statutory capital. Now, then the contracts which make it possible to place financial resources within the Islamic banks. These are those documents, and I wonder if you can see them. So, acquisition and sales, leasing agreements, real estate, transport, collateral, trusteeship, and different supply contracts, contracts on the opening of the current accounts for individuals and for companies, foreign currency accounts, and
the contracts on opening the letters of credit. Islamic financial services can be provided by setting up a group of financial companies under the common control. That was done in Tatarstan. There is Walter Bank, with which there are affiliation structures, leasing company, Diversification, trading financing company, investment fund, Islamic subsidiaries of the bank, a company of mutual financing and mutual insurance, and they can operate under legislation. The Diversification agency is attracting funds by contributions to the capital distribution between the companies, and the trading financing company, working company financing for production company, leasing companies, acquisition of the fixed assets of legal entities and entrepreneurs, attraction investment funds, attracting the investment for participating in investment projects. The subsidiary of the bank is providing services to the customers, and the company for financing the rent and purchasing of property for physical entity, investment capital, participation investment products on the basis of sharing profits and losses, the projects that do not contradict to Islamic requirements, and mutual insurance society, Islamic insurance products, and making payment to the participants, and there is an element of investment funds within the insurance systems. Contracts at which different capitals of Islamic financial groups can be placed and attracted. A statutory document of the reorganization, TNV, participation, contract on joint activity, on interest-free loan, purchase and sales of property, commodities, transportation vehicles, rent of housing, and the contract on intentions, leasing, delivery, providing of services, and statutes of partnership under the debt and financing. Revenues can be received on the basis of bonds, getting the proper right to participate in the profit based on the results of the activity by the issuer. Since the Russian banks have no experience on issuing and maintaining of sukuks, these instruments should be used and we can attract foreign banks as a temporary measure, and the first mandates have been already signed, and work is carried out on organizations of the first sukuk, and I think next or this year The debut issues of Sukuk by the corporations of the Russian Federation will be effected. Placement by the bank and attraction of the funds together with Sharia is possible by investment activity, including acquisition of the shares or bonds of Sukuk. The bank can also acquire and sell securities. Additional revenues are formed due to additional financing activity and issuing of securities and their placement that is currently being done by several banks. The following options of debt financing and shareholding financing are possible in accordance to the Islamic principle: a repurchase of their part or participation in the statutory capital, attraction of the purchase of their shares, origination and issue of bonds of Sukuk partly or entirely, and helping the customer to acquire the securities of the Russian or foreign issuers. As for the necessary amendments to the Russian law, first, to permit the banks to participate directly in trading activities. The deputy of the State Duma, Savelyev, put forward this initiative in March that served as a basis for organizing several round tables to discuss these themes. The Ministry of Finance so far has issued a not quite positive resolution, but that was expected, and it will be finalized and submitted for consideration further. Besides, there are some other issues to transfer the principles of borrowing operations, paying and return from those to those that might be added, that might be changed by the terms of the contract. Murabaha transactions, Inessa explained that the bank is the purchase of the property, and there are some additional difficulties if this procedure is not facilitated. The stock taking of the funds based or received from Islamic Corporation to organize a special scheme of taking into account the risks and setting up the reserves, to set up specialized investment accounts on the basis of banking institutes without recourse and payment for the banking Islamic deposits, and to consider a possibility of increasing the number of participants of the partnership, because now there is a restriction to 20 participants only. It is also necessary to make amendments to the taxation. Taxation when selling the goods should be comparable to taxation of the common banking operations. On the profit tax on the loans will be paid when the interest is accrued, and it will be paid simultaneously after the transaction. To bring the taxation of operations in case of issuing Sukuk and transfer of the property involved to the issue of securities to the comparable level of taxation of common securities. Issue of securities should be exempt from VAT, or the taxes should be deferred and later there will be reverse transactions after repayment to determine the taxation of the operations with warehouses certificates. Other amendments, in addition to the legislation and tax amendments, the common standards and IT platforms have to be developed, and we have to introduce the Islamic terminology to secular law. For instance, in Turkey, the Islamic banks are not called Islamic banks, they are called participation banks, and when we're speaking about Darab Musharak, many people might not understand it, And essentially, there are adequate translations to the Russian language, and as to introduce or non-introduce the territory, it is discussed at different sites. Some people say that we might avoid the name Islamic banks, we might call it ethnical bank or the participatory bank, because now our colleagues from who are Orthodox say that there are some issues which are quite similar in those who have Orthodox faith and in Muslims with respect to the banking instruments that they would like to use. So there are different options here. And in addition to the Development Fund of Islamic Bank and Finance, I also represent the Association of Regional Investment Agencies that comprises 23 corporations and agencies in the Russian Federation in 23 regions. And we see that the interest to Islamic financing is recorded not only in Muslim regions but in non-Muslim regions as well. And this is mostly related to consideration of new alternative instruments for attraction of the investment. And being a counsel of the Prime Minister of Tatarstan on interaction with Islamic financial institutions, I can say that this is another indicator showing that Tatarstan, unlike other regions of the Russian Federation, is seriously considering this matter. At the summit in Kazan in 2015, there will be the president of the Islamic Development Bank will participate, and there will be managers of the group of Islamic Bankers of Development on investments, on insurance, on trade, on financing of trade, and so on. And it will be also attended by the General Secretary of Organization of Islamic Cooperation, our federal and regional and governmental bodies will be represented, as well as business community. So realizing that today the working groups have been set up and the feasibility study has been prepared, and is being prepared, there are a lot of specialists who have been trained not only in the Russian Federation, but also abroad in Islamic financing. And we even have a database of such specialists now. And since we have a certain number of traditional banks that want to open Islamic banking subsidiaries or units at least, I think that all of us will have enough of work to do. And of course it would be very good if the legal aspects would be taken into account, and there would be more involved professionals, such professionals like you. They will be needed, and I invite you to work actively in that field. Thank you very much for having listened to my presentation. Probably there were a lot of technical issues, and it is available to our colleagues, to the organizers, and if you want, you can get the presentations, not only my presentation, but the presentation of the other colleagues. And now I would like to give the floor to our colleague from the United Arab Emirates. Since this country is in the forefront of the investments from the whole world, including the investments related to Islamic financing, he will discuss his activities and how Dubai and Emirates are using Islamic financing. So I give the floor to Mr. Kostas Inawa. He will make his presentation in English. Kostas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I thank the forum for inviting me to present? It's my first time here in St. Petersburg, and I've been very welcome here and enjoying my time here. I represent an office that offers corporate services in the UAE, and we are very much involved into bringing together investors from the UAE investing abroad, but as well investors investing in the UAE. I've got a few statistics for you for the beginning of my presentation. As you will see, in 2010, over 1.6 billion, or 23% of the world population, are Muslims. By percentage of the total population in a region considering themselves Muslim, 24.8% in Asia and Oceania, and 91.2% of the Middle East and North Africa are considered Muslims. Therefore, it's only natural that in the Middle East, Islamic finance is very much developed and is a prerequisite for almost all residents in the Middle East to be dealing, to be completing their dealings within Islamic finance. A list of the Arab Gulf countries, as you can see: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and finally United Arab Emirates. In the past 10 years, I would say United Arab Emirates and especially Dubai have really become the financial hub of the Middle East, where especially Saudi Arabia, Oman and Kuwait look to really have their interests within the United Arab Emirates and Dubai. Here I've put together a table really with some facts of the GCC countries. I'm not going to go through them, but then later on when you take the presentation, you'll be able to look at these facts.
Yes.
Yes. This slide really looks at also Muslim countries that are not part of the GCC, like Iran and Iraq and Yemen, and really their presence still is growing and they have a good presence within the UAE. For Iran, what I would say as well is that, as you say, there are some sanctions against Iran, which different governments are looking to be lifted. Once the sanctions in Iran are lifted, then again it gives the opportunity to other countries to attract investments from Iran or invest in Iran. Here I've got a visual of Dubai, how it was about 20-25 years ago, and how it has become, and how it is really the hub of the Middle East. I was going also to show a short film on the UAE and Dubai, but some technical issues we had, we couldn't really show the film. Again, here I've got some facts on the UAE and the Emirates of the UAE, and when the United Arab Emirates formed in 1971, coming out from a British colony. This slide looks at the UAE and their trade investments that the United Arab Emirates and their interests that have in the UK, which is a good example how developed Islamic finance and relationships with other countries will attract investment in different countries. As you can see here, the interest is their interest in the UK is very high, having invested in the airports there, in offshore farm developments, in the exhibition centres in London, in purchasing football clubs, and also investing about 1.5 billion in the gateway developments in London, as well as in leisure. However, in turn, the UK has also is a very big exporter in the UAE, and in a way the relationship is mutual. So I would say for any country looking to attract investment from a region, I would say they would have also to look at investing in that country and having a mutual relationship. Looking at Qatar and the investments in Qatar, from Qatar into Europe, again, they have heavily invested in the UK, about 65 billion US dollars in France and in Germany. And of course, within these countries, Islamic finance is developed. The next slides, I will be looking at Dubai International Financial Center. Basically, the DIFC is a different free zone within Dubai, which offers a legal system which is based on British common law, and is really a gateway for banks to establish in the UAE and attract investment, as well as investment houses and asset managers that are looking to attract investment from the UAE. I'm saying here that really the DIFC is the ideal platform where the Gulf Cooperation Council countries have come together to form the DIFC and give the DIFC a separate legal jurisdiction from the UAE and from Sharia law, in order to attract the banks and as well as investments within the country. The UAE is a time zone gap location where the DIFC is geographically defined within Europe and Asia, as well as New York and Hong Kong and Tokyo, which are also important financial centers. As I mentioned before, the legal framework in the DIFC was given a federal decree in 2004, allowing it to operate separately as a separate financial free zone. And it has a degree of sovereignty from the central bank of the UAE. The different sectors that are available within the DIFC, as you will see there, we've got banking services, asset management, insurance and reinsurance, as well as Islamic finance. The global market for the Islamic finance products is worth over 260 billion and is expected to grow at a rate of 12 to 15% over each year for the next 10 years. It's likely to account for more than 50 to 60% of the total savings of the world's 1.2 billion Muslims. within the next decade. There is a growing number of infrastructure projects within the region requiring Sharia compliant finance, but the market is still underdeveloped and fragmented. Dubai aims to become a major center for product innovation for Islamic investors and borrowers. So, as you can imagine, the opportunity for different banking institutions coming from this region is high, and I believe that institutions should be looking towards the UAE and Dubai. Different ways that banks or investment houses here should be looking to the Middle East if they were trying to attract investment from this region, should be perhaps to set up as representative offices within the DIFC or even within mainland UAE. Some of the top 20 of the world's top 25 banks are already in the DIFC, for example, like Credit Suisse, RBS, and the Bank of China. Here on this slide, I've listed the different categories of licenses that are available within the DIFC, where Category 1 is a fully fledged banking license. Category 2 is providing credit and dealing with these investments, and Category 3 is asset management. Category 4 is only financial advisory and custody. And as you will see in Category 5, we've got Islamic financial institutions where the activities above fall in a different license, from the ones above. The levels of investments required for different category licenses, as you will see, Category 1 as well as Category 5, which is the Islamic financial institutions, required a minimum investment of 10 million US dollars as capital. How to access the market? Set up a branch or a representative office in the DIFC or the mainland. Develop partnerships with different offices, law offices, management consulting offices, or even sheikhs offices who act as family offices to the wealthy funds and the wealthy families there. Also, develop partnerships within UAE local banks. Obviously, UAE local banks have developed and sophisticated Islamic finance departments where they have their own councils, as my colleague mentioned before, looking at Sharia compliant investments. I think that's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Kostas. Thank you very much. Linar, maybe you comment what has just been said. Indeed, in the world today, the main centers are Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and Dubai in UAE. But we can see how quickly Dubai is turning into a truly global center. The Malaysians are losing because the involvement of the government, the involvement of the Sheikh Mohammed in the creation of the Dubai center, and the attraction and the involvement of structures, approaches, experts, and creation of all the necessary conditions makes Dubai very different from any other central financial services in the Islamic world. Now, we were saying that the Russian Federation, the city of Moscow, wants to turn into an international financial system, but there must be an ecosystem for these international financial centers to exist, and Islamic financial institutes and products should be involved and the experience of Dubai in this context can be of great use for us if we wish to move towards the creation of the International Financial Center. But as our colleague has just said, today, if we talk about Islamic funding in the regions of Russia and in the CIS countries, then we must say that Almaty used to be the real center, but with the new decision of the Kazakhstan government, the financial center is being transferred to Astana. So Astana will promote itself as the regional financial center, but Dubai is truly the international center. So we must learn how to work with Dubai. Many of our banks visit Dubai. Unfortunately, they are unable at the moment to find a common language, and they cannot find common interest within the framework of projects. But, well, the Oriental world is not an easy world. We must get used to each other and establish partnerships. It's not an easy matter at all. But for a country with a planned economy for so many years, and for the country that within 20 years has been able to build a financial system of the Western type, will not find it very difficult to begin to work at the Islamic market. I'm talking about you, colleagues. You need to get involved in this particular type of work. Leonard, and at the end of our discussion, allow me to say a few words about
the possibilities that are offered by the Association of Arab European Legal Association, with headquarters in Luxembourg, set up 5 years ago. I'm the president of it, together with advocates from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates that are interested in studying the experience available not only in Europe, but also in the territory of the countries of the former Soviet Union. And we carry out jointly legal reforms, thus involving the countries, the Muslim countries, the countries of the Middle East, to different investment projects. We have a creative panel for exchanging different projects and for joint maintenance of clients' projects in different countries. More than 200 legal companies and specialists, theoreticians from different universities of of Europe and the Middle East are actively involved in our activities. We hope that the number of the lawyers and advocates and representatives of the public structures will be increasing, who will represent Russia, who represent other countries of the CIS, and they will be actively involved in our activities. We also invite you, will inform you via the organizing committee of the forum on our events, and probably this experience will be useful both for practical work with your customers, with your projects, and for implementation of the interesting mechanisms, legal mechanisms that are available to our colleagues abroad. Thank you very much once again. And to conclude, probably I'll give the floor to our practical specialist, Vyacheslav Zabrodin, who has been working a lot with state institutions, and probably he will share his experience. It is always interesting to look at those persons who have stayed here till the end. They really believe that it is possible to get money through Islamic financing. That is a possible factor. And our core activities are foreign companies and foreign business in Russia. From the viewpoint of our involvement in financing and financing projects, Islamic forensic for us first emerged in 2008 when some restrictions restrictions appeared related to financial resources. So we have been studying from 2001, and there was such a forecast in the market. In Russia, the real interest emerged in the late 2000s when there were serious limitations on attraction of the Western resources because the free resources were quite scarce, and they were now currently they are limited by certain sanctions. But the global idea was that at the time when they were trying to find some alternatives, they focused on different regions of the world. The first and the main region is China, and China is probably of the most prospective states to cooperate with our country from the viewpoint of financing, but it is not easy to get that financing because there is a major political constituent that has a strong effect on the system of decision making and the speed of decision making, and everything depends on the success on negotiations. Islamic financing is more institutionalized from that viewpoint. We're not the first to try to discover it. For instance, 30 years ago, the Britons started to engage in Islamic financing. That was a recognized process on their behalf, and there was some information today concerning the amount of money attracted to the British projects during that period of time, and a lot of projects which they implemented probably would have been useful for us so that we could use their experience. According to the information available in Britain, there are 22 banks providing financing based on Islamic principles. 16 banks are international English banks, and 6 banks are Islamic banks that are engaging in exclusively Islamic financing. As to the scatter of the services, it covers practically all the spheres from acquisition of property by private individuals. So these projects have been developed and the mechanisms have been developed by today. According to the preliminary assessments, unfortunately I couldn't find the detailed information. The amount is about $3 million, the assets of Islamic banking in the world. So there is a huge amount of money, and I think that Russia, from the viewpoint of its status and its position as a developing economy, could be quite interesting for Islamic banking. I agree with Lunar that as to the formal restrictions on the use of Islamic banking, legal restrictions, they are not available. Undoubtedly, they are present because there is no infrastructure. As to the possibility of attracting Islamic banking to Russia today, this possibility exists, and the examples that are available, to say nothing about the successful experience of Tatarstan that has been used. It is also available in other regions. It is not always called Islamic banking, but from the viewpoint of the legal basis currently available in Russia, we can use a lot of instruments that are used in Islamic financial operations. And thus, if it is necessary to adopt a law on Islamic bank in Russia, there are two viewpoints. Probably it would be more correct that we really need this law, and it is currently being developed at the Committee of State Duma on the Financial Markets, so the process is quite active. So far there are no first drafts of the law to be discussed, but internally they are being discussed quite actively, and I think that soon they will be publicly available and you'll be able to participate more actively in the discussion. As for the alternative version, there is a certain number of potential amendments that could be made to the activities of our financial institutions, starting from the central bank, and those financial institutions that would be directly involved in Islamic financing, that would make it possible to use the available legal base, and on these grounds to apply the instruments and the resources used by the financial instruments in the Islamic world. Probably I will try to be brief, analyzing a small number of issues because much has been said by our presentation, and mainly they are technical. In other words, the main difference between the Islamic financing, the standard and standard financing, is that it is impossible to use the interest. So it is interest is prohibited by Islamic financing, and that is a specific restriction for the activities of our banking system. If a bank exercises some other activities in addition to using money and to be repaid with a certain interest rate, that activity is prohibited. There are some other options to avoid it, and in this situation, the banks are not prohibited to use the money for making contributions to the authorized capital of the company, and the creation of the SPV will be an alternative means of attracting financing for the specific project. From the viewpoint of the pure law, that is a bypassing of the law, not following its principles. If we speak about a long-term program, if we are talking about the interest on both parties and the possibilities for the both parties, from my viewpoint, this exists, it would be more correct to use and to make the necessary amendments to the current legislative acts and to adopt a potential law on Islamic financing that would make it possible to legitimize the issues that which the practical organizations, banks face today while implementing the project. And in this situation, it is necessary to permit the banks to have a possibility to engage in other types of activities, and if these banks get a license related with Islamic financing or have a certain segregated activity related with that type of activities. And then this type of activity cannot be regulated and taken into account under the standard banking financing regulations and standard banking taxation, because it just goes beyond the limits that are currently used by the regulator for these purposes. Naturally, the question of reservation is quite important because the banks require, in case of certain operations, to set up significant reserves, and such an instrument as, for instance, acquisition of the property that is provided for by Islamic financing would demand a creation of additional significant reserves that are not well justified from the viewpoint of real saturation of the operation per se. The questions of VAT are also highly important, I agree. If we successfully transfer the property from one player to another, and each time it will be VAT will be applied, the idea involved in the financing will be null and void. So there are some proposals related to the possibility of regulating VAT at the level of the last transaction. Another important issue is related with the so-called infrastructure of Islamic financing and the questions of assessment, because in accordance with the laws and principles of Sharia, that is not an abstract following of the principle, that is an assessment of a particular transaction in accordance with the principles used in Sharia, and each transaction should get an approval and confirmation whether it complies to these principles from a consultation council. In Arabic countries, there are 4 schools of Sharia scientists who are engaged in it, or they say 6 schools, which in different ways assess the same principles, but they give different assessment to certain provisions related to the use of the instruments of Islamic financing. In Russia at present, such instruments are not available. They are used only on the basis of external instruments, but from the viewpoint of possibility of their implementation, that system is not as complicated, and the banks who are going to deal in Islamic financing should create some consultancy agency within themselves. If the central bank is really interested in development of Islamic financing, we have to set up a certain the same instrument within the central bank that would be able to assess whether each specific bank is involved in the project, really exercises the activities related to the Islamic financing or not, because there are potential risks that certain banks will be just using a certain form of Islamic financing for hidden operations related with other interests and activities. I think that it will be quite interesting and useful to take into account the experience of Kazakhstan, and it can be used in this sense. They have already taken the steps that haven't yet been taken by Russia, and that is one of the reasons why Islamic financiers calmly come to the market of Kazakhstan, because they realize that the infrastructure is being created and there is a whole set of instruments using which they can protect their interest to the full extent without violating the principles which is the basis for Islamic financing. At the end, I would like to tell you that the amendments needed to the legislation probably are not quite simple, but they are easily implementable, and the number of these amendments is not as significant, and the experience and principles of realizations are available in the world, so they can be easily used, and the prospects that are particularly a potential offered by the possibility of Islamic financing in Russia take into account the fact how many Muslims live in Russia and what are the possibilities of the Russian economy and the lack of the Russian infrastructure offered for investment of the Islamic funds. I think that the advocates and the lawyers engaged in the activity should not be only actively involved in the process, but the state should realize that that is one of the alternative trends of diversifying and developing our economy that is necessary, and localization, because without money, localization would not be possible today. Thank you. Allow me?
No, allow me to comment. In principle, what Mr. Zabrodin said demonstrates two aspects. Now, Russia or the Eurasian Union might choose the traditional way, and or it might choose the pathway of reforming. So if we introduce the traditional way when introducing the Islamic funding, then such values as fairness, as justice, as prevention of evil, as good, play a very significant role. Good faith, Hassan, loans, good loans, so that the poor and the entrepreneurs in small businesses have a right to approach an Islamic bank and get a loan without any interest that they have to pay, but without any need to pay back more than they have received. So yes, acquisition, sales, rent, that's the pathway chosen by Malaysia, by London, but the financial centers. It's a sort of a technical, legal basis which is applied to the field of a specific jurisdiction. So it's a technical matter. But as I understand, the State Duma is involved in the discussion of what Russia was, moral banking or just Islamic money. Now, if we take the countries of the Gulf of Persia, then we won't be able to attract investors from those countries if we choose the purely technical approach. The Sharia councils there are usually made up of the representatives of the religious schools, and this is a theosophy. Indeed, whenever there is a transaction being approved, they follow this approach. With the Malaysian approach, the Sharia boards of council, there are mostly secular representatives. There are doctors of law, candidates of law, members of these boards who are familiar with the provisions of the Islamic law, and they do not go that deep into the ideology of Sharia. So I think that it's not that simple and easy. So at this stage of the development of the Eurasian Union, it is most important to remember what I have mentioned in my presentation. If we make this a mistake, the mistake of the formal understanding of the Islamic banking, we might easily limit for ourselves the access to the market. And this concerns the European Union as well. I am a resident of the European Union, and there, in the European Union, there is also a discussion of Islamic banking in France, in Luxembourg, in Germany, in Belgium. Now we can list the countries. But if the economic space does not understand why they need Islamic banking, then they won't be able to enjoy the advantages provided by Islamic banking in the countries of the Arabic world. The IMF, in its latest resolution, recognizes that Islamic financing is a global trend, that it makes it possible to stabilize the capital markets. And it's not the question of technology or technique, but it's the issue of relationship between the contracting parties. It's the issue of trust and confidence parties in a transaction. If we follow the principles of the Islamic law, then of particular importance there is the quality of the other party. It's not just a situation when we make some contribution into a joint business, but it's important to know who you are in relation to the partners. It's important to know if you have a serious moral strength. And we will see what happens in September. G20 is planning to discuss in Turkey these issues. The development of Islamic financing is on the agenda, and we understand that, of course, we need to follow what is happening at these summits if we want to work at a high level and with a certain scope and scale. We must wait a bit and understand better how this platform can work for the Eurasian Union. Another comment. While the colleague spoke, I remembered discussions we had last week at the time of the conference, when representatives of commercial banks were saying that they were ready to work, and some already attract Islamic finances. But the main problem is that the legislation doesn't make it possible to work fully. And there were questions to the central bank, and the central bank answered that everything that is not banned is allowed. So if there is no direct ban in legislation on something, then you can work and attract Islamic funding. And no, this is a tricky approach, because any time you can withdraw the license from us, because what we do is against the legislation, so we can easily lose the license. So the acting legislation really doesn't make it possible to attract Islamic funding fully. The Islamic Development Bank and other major financial structures are willing to invest in Russia, in Kazakhstan, and other countries of Eurasia. But once again, the existing legislation doesn't allow that. There are constraints, and we know this from our experience. There are negotiations about the opening of the banks and the subsidiaries, and we discuss projects. And the main problem is that the acting legislation works against that. That's why we amended the legislation. That's why we amended the acting legislation and draw some new legislation. So that's because legislation needs to comply with the conditions set by the countries of the Islamic world. And as for the work within the Eurasian Economic Community. Now, as you know, we are today, beginning with January this year, it's an acting agreement, and there is a lot of spheres to be harmonized, and one of them is financial sphere. We have several stages of this work planned, and we have certain agreements that by 2025 we establish a subnational body, and of course the regulators, the central banks, play a very significant role before this supranational body exists, because we need to carry out harmonization of legislation. And in view of all of these events, we really have to work together and need to carry out the harmonization of legislation. My question to our colleague from Kazakhstan. Now, you followed the traditional way or the reformers pathway? Reformers. I said yes. They asked us why we did not apply the experience of such countries as UK. We selected this particular pathway because we had examined the experience of other countries, Malaysia, UK, and other countries, and they have our own, the Kazakhstan model for Islamic funding. I can add, with Mr. Yakupov last week, we visited Almaty, where the financial board, and we talked to our colleagues from the Central Bank of Kazakhstan. We discussed this particular matter, and the colleagues definitely said, yes, it's a serious matter, the matter of the method selected, but they have not decided finally yet. In my presentation, I said that the Malaysian method, that's what the Saudi highly positioned bankers talk about. The Sharia councils in the Arabic countries do not recognize fatwa, the resolutions of the Sharia councils of Malaysia, because they do not, well, in certain positions, no, interpreters cannot hear. The speaker is not using the microphone. So there are legal forms which are permitted by the Sharia councils of Malaysia, but which are not acceptable for the Sharia councils of the Arabic countries. And the Malaysian method is somewhat easier, but we do not know whether it is more profitable or not. According to the colleagues from Kazakhstan, they follow that pathway, and the Kazakhstan representatives say that the investors need to give a signal concerning the concerning that, who is going to be the customer of the coming of the Islamic banks to the Eurasian space. And in Saudi Arabia, they say that if we follow the traditional pathway, then we can talk about Islamic banking. That's true. But if we choose the pathway of reforms, then we cannot talk about Islamic banking as such. And as Mr. Yakupov said, as in case of Turkey, it's either participation of banks or bank or eco bank and ethical bank or alternative banking, and there can be used other synonyms as well, but it is not Islamic banking as such. In Islamic banking is based on deep philosophical and moral positions applications of Sharia. I can just say that this lively discussion means that this is a topical issue. I just wanted to add that although, well, no matter what particular variant is selected, traditional or based on reforms, the problem of the introduction of financial standards, Islamic standards, is what we need to do. No foreign bank, and even Islamic bank, is going to come here and do anything at all for us. It's our country, it's our jurisdiction, and unless we decide for ourselves at the technical, at the political level, what we need to do, nobody is going to do anything for us. They can demonstrate examples or display their interest, but they cannot they cannot create the ecosystem necessary for the development of Islamic banking and financing. That's all in our hands. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to thank all the participants, all the delegates. You can come up to the speakers and we will be happy to exchange contact information, and we will be able to work with your projects and act as advisors and consultants. And if you are not that well familiar with the theory on financial, Islamic financial, there is a site, Islamic Financial, and you will find all the information there about Islamic banking. Then there is also news for Russia from the CIS countries and abroad, and you will be able to trace all the latest trends there. Now, once again, I would like to invite you to Kazan Summit 2015 on the 15th, 16th June this year. Welcome there.